What if mere touch synesthesia, defined as the experience that ensues when the stimulation of one sensory modality, vision, automatically triggers a perception in a second modality, touch, in the absence of any direct stimulation to this second modality, were not only misnamed, but radically misunderstood? It's not just the nomenclature that I'm concerned with here. Why a synesthesia that is said to move between touch and vision isn't called vision-touch synesthesia like its sisters, sound taste, color grapheme, shape taste, but the very presupposition that situates it in the parsing of sense modalities, vision plus touch, with bodies bounded into subject locators of sense. For even if it were called vision-touch synesthesia, it would still take for granted a whole set of beliefs about how perception works, not to mention what is considered worthy of registering. Despite a rare admission that for some the experience of being touched without touch occurs through an object, mere touch synesthesia is predominantly a humanist concept. To be touched by that which we see is, in most of the literature, to be touched by the human. This is the question I want to ask here. What is assumed in the presupposition that to be moved is to be moved by the human? And what is assumed when we take vision as the predominant activator for the experience of being touched by the world? Circling around autistic perception and deaf-blindness, I want to ask how neurotypicality as normative standard for human experience operates in the presuppositions of sense. 1,000 other things sing to me. The dominant neuroscientific literature works with a deficit model of sensation that is neurotypical through and through. Neurotypical most emphatically in its presupposition of a body schema, which acts as the normative ground on which all divergent experience is mapped. In this literature, mere touch synesthesia is chiefly described, as mentioned above, as depending on one body seeing, feeling the touch of another directly on their skin. You touch yourself, and I feel it because I see it. In this account, the experience of feeling the other is, paradoxically, considered a deficit. It weakens the body schema. With the feeling of you directly experienced on my body, I lose a bit of what separated me from you. The coming into relation is considered a loss. The deficit model of sensation begins with the presupposition that senses are fixed and located. Working with a pre-constituted body schema whose sense of agency, it is said, is fractured by the increase in sensation. Bodies lose their integrity in the encounter with the touch of the other. This approach, which situates sense of agency as central to what it means to have a body, placing what I have called the intentionality, agency, volition triad ahead of the agencement of experience coming into itself to activate a bodying, emphasizes that bodies are above all individual, separate envelopes that are in the world but not of it. Bodies are only properly bodies when they can fully distinguish themselves from the world, the implication always that bodies are separate entities that have dominance over their sensations and, by extension, over their movements. The deficit model perceives any deviation from this norm to be a lack. When we lack the ability to distinguish our world from the world of others, we lose something of what makes us, properly speaking, bodies, and, by extension, human. Feeling the touch of another body or another object on our body is already a misnomer. It makes too strong a distinction between body and world, a distinction that is everywhere at play in the neuroscientific studies of all forms of synesthesia, but perhaps even more forcefully so in studies of mere touch synesthesia. Quote, individuals with mere touch synesthesia experience touch on their own bodies when observing another person being touched. Specifically, the images that participants had initially perceived as containing equal quantities of self and other become more likely to be recognized as the self after viewing the other being touched. Meister, Banassi, and Securis. Self-identity is the starting point, and it is in the self-identity that the experience of touch is located. Quote, these results suggest that observing touch on others not only elicits a conscious experience of touch in mere touch synesthesia, but also elicits a change in the mental representation of the self, blurring self-other boundaries. End quote, same authors. There is no mention here of the emergent quality of sensation produced in the world. No attempt is made to explore the ways in which the relational milieu activates this singular composition, nor is there an effort to explore how the touch that is felt might move beyond the limited concept of simple location. No questions are asked about how that touch alters the feel of the space, the quality of sensation, beyond the actual location of the touch. What is assumed is always that we know what constitutes a body. A body, it must always be remembered, that in its neurotypicality stands in for the normative standard of whiteness. Because there is no account of a processual bodying, there is no way to articulate what is activated in the sensation, only what is lost. When bodies are mapped in advance, abstracted from their environment and parsed according to the normative standard, the only conclusion can be that what diverges is a loss, a deviation from the norm. For this is clearly what is at play here, though never addressed as such. In the mere touch example, the activation of sense caused by the overlap of sense means individuality, or the neurotypical norm, is weakened. In their, quote, becoming one, the one who senses too much loses the very boundary that made it a body. In study after study, the assumption is that the field of relation activated by the touch of the world reduces the body schema, placing not only the body at risk, but the whole edifice of representation neurotypicality upholds. What if the contours of a body were never intact? In this return to an account of touch more than a decade after publishing Politics of Touch, I hope to do 4 things. 1, demonstrate that the force of reaching toward, which is how I define touch in Politics of Touch, troubles the model of, quote, sense of agency at the heart of accounts of mere touch synesthesia. 2, build on John Lee Clark's account of distantism as it plays out not only in deafblind culture, but more broadly in the neurotypical worldview. 3, consider the ways in which accounts of mere touch synesthesia, as well as synesthesia more broadly, support a deficit model of sensation that is deeply neurotypical. 4, explore how ProTactile, a movement for language in the making and deafblind experience, remaps the space-time of sensation away from the categorical limitations that come with the imposition of sensory regimes that privilege the body-world separation. Quote, the TV is off, but I can still hear and feel on my skin the current of electricity powering all that equipment, writes Aspie Girl on her blog Autism and Angels. Hearing what moves infrasensorially through her surrounds, being moved and changed by the field of relation, makes it impossible for Aspie Girl to hold on to the neurotypical imposition of body-world separation. Already considered at a deficit by the standard of neuroscientific work on synesthesia because she is autistic, she is doubly pathologized, her divergent sensory processing further evidence of her, quote, faulty sense of agency. She suffers from a disturbance of sense perception that will, most likely, be considered as a disadvantage in learning environments. She will be taught, through the ubiquitous behavioral codes that are systemic in our education systems, to direct her perception so as to sense less fully, thereby attempting to craft a less porous body. But this will not actually make her sense less. It will simply make more violently apparent that a sensing body in movement is a deficient body. She will learn that in order to pass, she will have to background the feel of electricity on her skin. She will have to act as though she is in control of her surroundings. She will pretend that she has agency over what moves her. She will be told in 1,000 ways that value resides in subtracting from the welter of experience. She will learn that the standard of neurotypical life is one of sense poverty. She will be considered properly treated if she can, quote, pay attention. Attention no longer dancing at the pace of the more than. What if we were to turn the sensory model on its head and ask what keeps so many feeling so little? Study after study links autism and synesthesia. Indeed, this view has become so widespread that even Simon Baron-Cohen, renowned neuroscientist in the areas of both autism and synesthesia, who for decades kept his research on autism and synesthesia separate, recently decided to bridge them. Quote, I have studied both autism and synesthesia for over 25 years, and I had assumed that one had nothing to do with the other. These findings will refocus research to examine common factors that drive brain development in these traditionally very separate conditions. An example is the mechanism apoptosis, the natural pruning that occurs in early development, where we are programmed to lose many of our infant neural connections. In both autism and synesthesia, apoptosis may not occur at the same rate, so that these connections are retained beyond infancy, end quote. In his research, rather than asking how apoptosis might challenge his theory of mind blindness, the condition of not being able to read the mind of another that has served to dehumanize autistics by claiming that they are incapable of feeling empathy, by demonstrating that the hypersensorial tendency in autism that is likely in part due to apoptosis results in them being more in contact with the world and not less, Baron-Cohen takes it upon himself not only to re-emphasize the concept of mind blindness, but to counter other studies that suggest that those with mere touch synesthesia may be more attuned to the world than those without. When Baron-Cohen speaks of empathy, he is referring to the empathy quotient, a measure for empathy he developed with Sally Wheelwright. Empathy for Baron-Cohen and Wheelwright is, quote, a